In this video, what we're going to do is see how we can model a simple Christmas gift. We'll go through the modeling of the present as well as some techniques for creating an interesting looking ribbon and bow. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so here's what we're going to be trying to recreate here. Relatively simple, present, though you could modify the paper and the ribbon to suit your needs. I do want to point out that as far as the textures go, the pattern for the wrapping paper, I just use Microsoft Copilot. I suspect any kind of AI image generator would probably work. I asked it to create a Christmas wrapping paper texture, asked it to make it tileable, and then finally said, you know what, can you make it simpler? And I ended up with something that I thought looked pretty good and that works pretty well. So that's what we have here and what we will be using. Let's go ahead and start a new scene. I'm going to start just by creating the present. I'll start with a cube here. And we can honestly shape this however we want. This cube is 200 units on the y-axis, so I'll raise it up 100 so that it's sitting flat on the ground. That'll be helpful later. But yeah, I can resize this on the x-axis, the z, to end up with any particular shape I want. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my lines here just so we can see those. I do want a bit of a fillet just to give us some rounded edges. Those will be important later on. Maybe even turn that down a little bit to say 1 centimeter or so. And the 3 subdivisions works just fine. I do want an additional segment on the X and Z axis that'll allow us to create some flaps. Though you could add the segments on the Y if you wanted to create flaps there as well. From here, we can hit C on our keyboard or the Make Editable tool there to convert our cube from a parametric object to a polygon object. And now what I'm going to do is go into point mode so that we can add the additional cuts we need to create those flaps. So I'm going to right click, go to line cut, and I'm going to start in this corner, click there on that point, click in the middle point, click over, zoom in if I have to that point there. When I'm done, hit escape. We want to repeat that process on the opposite side here. Click, click, and there we go. So we have our flaps. Now, in my example, I did actually extrude these up a little bit. So I extruded them just a touch. That does make things a bit more complicated when it comes to the ribbon, so I'm not actually going to do it here. What is important, though, is to have this selection for the material. So I'll go ahead and choose, select, and store the selection there, and we'll call this corners. Be whatever you want. Now what I'm going to do is make the material. So new default material there, call this gift, apply it just like that for now. Stock our node editor there. And up here, search for texture. And yeah, we could load in anything we want. I'm just going to drag in my textures. So just drag it in from there. That's fine. So we have our texture, just dragged it in from Explorer. And I want to connect this to our base color. So it turns out I don't need that texture because of the way I did this. And that's kind of it, right? Now, if you wanted to keep things as simple as possible, then this is all you would need. But the problem with this is that it kind of lines up very perfectly. Whereas with a Christmas present, that never ends up being the case, unfortunately. So in the material tag here, I'm going to repeat the tiles, say something like 3. I take it back 2. So it's a bit smaller. And now to add a little bit of that kind of irregularity, what I can do is copy this material tag, by holding Control and dragging, and then adding my selection to it. And it doesn't really matter which one you do. I mean, I'm doing the bottom one, but like I said, it doesn't really matter. I mean, the pattern should be continuous really from here to here. It would be the other parts that aren't. So I will just use this original texture tag, but it's not going to really matter, as you'll see. What I need to do is select one of them. Actually, should do this to both of them first. Should have done this before I copied it, but I'm going to switch this to cubic. All right, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to select one of the material tags. Now that I'm in texture mode, I can move this. And notice how it's moving it just on the sides, but it's keeping it the same on our flaps here, as well as kind of the back. So that's exactly what we'd expect. And so it's what it's giving us is this little bit of a seam there. And it's not terribly noticeable. So if you want to play around with it to make sure things don't line up, then you absolutely can. And that's where extruding this just a bit does help. So, that looks pretty good overall, right? We can see those seams just a bit, and that's actually what we want with a Christmas present. I almost think maybe if they were just a little bit larger, we'd notice them more. So why don't I take the tiles and just do 1.5? Yeah, that seems to have helped a bit with that. And if you wanted to add that irregularity on other places, you absolutely can, but we're already kind of getting it on the sides. And this is one of the few times where, the fact our textures don't perfectly wrap does kind of work out for us. So that's pretty much it for the present. I'll switch to back to the standard layout now for the ribbons. And the ribbons are pretty simple too. I'm going to create a rectangle, and this is going to be kind of what the shape our ribbon is going to need to go around. So I need to size this to my gift. So I will switch to, say, a front view. Just size this as best I can. And, I can use the width and height. That'll certainly keep things even. I do want to get this pretty close. And so I can look, I can see I'm a bit off. So I'll move this up, something like that. Another thing I could do to help find out the size of this cube, select the cube and go into our coordinate manager here. And we can see it's, 273 by 255. And so that's really what we should be looking for here. So I can see I ended up getting a really, spot on. Actually, I take it back. It switched 273 and 255. So I was pretty close. 273 works there. I'm not sure. Let's see. The other one may be the 200 for the height. So that's actually what I want for that one. And if it's just a touch bigger, that's fine. But the closer, the better. And at this point, I'm actually better off just taking the rectangle and making it a child of the cube really quick, just so I can zero out those coordinates. So that way now we have this perfectly sized around it, and that's going to allow us to wrap the ribbon around this very precisely. And the way we're going to do this, let's call this gift, is by using a sweep. So I'll come over here to my generators, choose our sweep, put the rectangle in there, and I'll go ahead and add another rectangle. This will be the ribbon. So it's way too large. I'm going to switch to my scale tool, scale it down. You can kind of see now how we're going to create this ribbon. So you can see it, how it's sticking out a little bit. I'm going to scale this just until it's sticking out. And it's a little bit strange that it's only sticking out of one side here. But if that's the case, then I can always go back to this original rectangle and make it just a touch larger. Right? So something like that. And that's actually too much. So something like that. So that looks pretty good, at least in terms of how much we're sticking out, at least for now. What I want to do in this top rectangle is work with, let's see, is it the width? I take it back. It's the height this time around. Turn the coordinate manager off. We don't need that. And, there we go. So with this top one, you can make this as wide or as not wide as you want. We'll do 30. And I do want to try and round this out a little bit, pretty much every edge I can. I still may want to come in and scale this down to see if I can get it just a little bit closer, because the bottom rectangle, just so it lines up a little bit better. Good. And come in here, turn on rounding, turn this radius way down. We'd want pretty much the same radius we had before, which I think was 1 or 1.5 centimeters. So we'll do 1. That seems to work pretty good. Okay, so that looks good for our ribbon. All right, so we'll name this ribbon. And from there, once we have one ribbon, we can just control drag up to duplicate it and rotate it 90 degrees. Now what we need to do is go in and adjust the bottom one again to try and get it to match. So I think 256 just about works. Can we do 255? We can. That looks pretty good. And there we have it. There is our ribbon. Great. Now, at this point, we're ready to do the materials for the ribbon, but I want to throw in some lighting first because the ribbon material is going to be metallic and it really won't look very good without some lighting. So I'm going to add a backdrop really quick. Scale that up because it's way too small for this. Something like that looks good. I will add a dome light. I'm just going to add a dome light really for the reflection. So start that. There we go. You can see we're getting there. We're on our way there. And in our dome light, I'm going to add an HDRI. I will add one from the asset browser so we can open that, search for HDRI. And, I really like the studio ones. So let's grab this one. Let's see what it is. I'm not even sure. Studio HDRI Light Studio 14. I don't mind this one. Actually not too bad. But I'm not entirely happy with my shadows. So I could rotate this on the horizon to rotate our HDRI around, and maybe we would get something I like a little bit more. But I also think it's not a bad idea. I'm going to stop this for a second. To add an area light and almost treat the area light like our key light and our dome light like the fill and rim light if we were doing a 3-point light setup. So I'm going to create an area light. And what I'll also do is come over here in my area light and choose the add target tag and null. And that creates this null that I want to place in the middle of our present here, our gift. And now this area light, which is stuck inside here, is always going to look at it. So it doesn't matter where I position this, it will always look wherever that null is. So that's a great way to create a light quickly, essentially create a target light. From here, I'm going to turn off the kind of illumination we're getting here in our viewport because I don't find it very useful. So I'm going to uncheck illumination. And now's a good time to start rendering again and just kind of start experimenting with where I want this. And I think something like this looks pretty good. Yeah, I think that view looks pretty good. Zoom in, rotate it a little bit more, do something like that. Move our backdrop over to fill the background. And since I'm happy with that, I'm going to create a camera view so we can always get back to it. Right click on it, go to rigging tag and then protection so that I don't accidentally move it. So with that done, we can now work on the ribbon material. And we're not quite done with the ribbon. We'll add a few loops, but I want to add the material first. For that, start my IPR back up, open up my material manager, create a new material. Let's call it, well, didn't mean to open that up, but we will be needing that. Actually, we'll name this ribbon, or at least try to, and call it not ribbon, but close enough. I'll apply it to both of our ribbons. And like I said, the key to this one is metalness. So I'm going to set metalness to 1. That gives me a metallic material. And then I can adjust our base color here to add whatever I want. Now, I don't know about you guys, but at the time of this, I'm in 2025.0. I suspect there could be an update, but your color picker only seems to update once, right? I'm moving this around, changing the hue, nothing's updating. But what I found is if you scroll down the color here and use the color picker here, it does update. So hopefully that helps somebody because I do find it quite annoying not being able to do that. Now for the colors of the ribbon, I actually just kind of eyedrop something from here, right? That way the color kind of matches. So maybe something like that. I don't think it looks perfect. It does look pretty close. So if I'm not entirely happy with it, I can maybe increase the saturation, the value, just to get perhaps a little bit more. All right, and maybe if I'd gone 1 pixel to the left or to the right, we'd have something like that. But that's kind of it for the base ribbon material here. Now, what you can do to take this a bit further is work with the noise or some other kind of pattern to maybe make it sparkle a bit. So max on noise would be a good one. You could use the tiles texture because this has all sorts of nice patterns that we could use in our roughness. And I know a lot of these are cut off, but that would work very well in the roughness, perhaps even the bump to give this a little bit of texture. But yeah, I'm going to connect this to reflection roughness. Solo this so I can see it a bit better. And this is way too big. So we'll find the input, scroll down here, and just lower the overall scale till we get something super small, right? We want this to be, like I said, almost like glitter, and very much like the noise we try to avoid constantly in Redshift. So that looks okay. But what I can do is come into the noise and look at the colors I'm using. I'm using black and white. And in roughness, black equals 0%, white equals 1. And I don't want that entire range. So maybe we'll start at, say, 15%. And then go to, I don't know, something like 35%. Right? And it's just super subtle. Okay, if you want it more or less subtle, you can push those colors even further. And you could always try using this as a bump map. Now, part of the problem with using this directly as a bump map is we are using some really similar values here. So you may want to duplicate the bump map once you've, the noise, once you like the size and pattern here, and then plug that into the bump map so you can change the colors a bit. By default, though, we get something that's a bit too much, I would say, right? Not a huge fan of that, but we can just lower the height scale here until we are happy with it. It's just, once again, subtle, okay? So that's kind of the base ribbon. Now, what I did in the other one was added a little bit of a green kind of part to this. Now, there are a few different ways you could do this. One of them is a bit destructive. The other is a little bit more involved. So it really just kind of depends. But one of the ways you could do this would be to make the ribbon editable and then go in and add a couple of cuts and then apply a new material to the middle there. Okay. And I'm going to undo that because the other way I did this was by duplicating the ribbon. So I'm going to name these red ribbon 1, red ribbon 2. And I'll duplicate this one. This will be, say, green ribbon 1. And all I'm going to do is start by making our bottom rectangle here just a bit larger. So we should see it kind of like peek out a little. And then making the width smaller. All right, except not on our bottom rectangle here. I meant to do that. Sorry, the height on this top one. So we end up with something like this. And you can see how it's sticking out. And that's, man, that's more than I would like. So if I need to come in here and just type in slightly smaller values and take away 0.5 centimeter from each of these, that's fine. Could maybe go a little bit smaller, but we'll say that's good. And then with our ribbon, duplicate it. Call this one green, whatever that is. And then switch the material out, change the color. And what do you know? We have a green ribbon. Now, just like before, I'm going to eyedrop the green, at least to start, so I get close to the value. And actually, maybe we try from the old Christmas tree here. That was not a good color. All right, still getting not great color, but hey, like I said, we can fix that. We can push this a bit further ourselves, and we'll still have something that works pretty well. And if I want to change the width of this again, come here to the height because that makes sense. Yeah, we have our green ribbon. So we would just repeat that process. Duplicate the red one, rename it, change the material on it. Maybe it's going to be easier to start by adjusting, actually, coming down here. And I think we added not a whole, but 0.5 to each of these. So math is pretty easy, but you can always just type in plus 0.5 as well. And then in this top one is where we adjusted the height to get whatever we wanted. And you can see what I did with the top one, 15. So we'll do that with this one. Great. So there's our ribbons. We can see that's looking pretty good, right? Once again, for my camera, that's what we have. I'm going to create a quick material for the backdrop just to give it a little bit more. So maybe just a little darker and just a little more roughness. But yeah, I don't mind that. All right, so that just leaves us with the kind of bow. And look, there are a lot of different looks to a bow. And the process is pretty much the same. We're going to create a sweep. Okay. So I'll zoom in here, go to my pen tool, make sure I don't have any splines or anything selected, and just kind of click in the middle, click out, maybe something like that. And you may be going, well, that's not very good. And it isn't. But what I'm going to do now is select these points, all of them, right click and switch their interpolation to soft. Now we're starting to get somewhere. I just need to break a few of them in order to kind of make it not intersect as much. So I'm going to select this point, hold shift to break it, and kind of there we go. Take this point, essentially do the same thing. There we go. If you wanted to work with this one, you absolutely could, right? And so maybe we'll bend this one in just a bit, where this point starts to get a little bit kind of tricky. Honestly, maybe this just should be a little closer. But however you want to do the bow is entirely up to you. But yeah, that looks pretty good to me. Let's get out of the camera here. I'm actually done with my material editor, so I'll switch back to my standard layout. It's not too bad. And we're going to use another sweep. So honestly, I could just duplicate one of our red sweeps since it has the material on it. Get rid of, oh gosh, I think it's the bottom rectangle, and put our spline in there. And there we go. All right, now I'm honestly not a huge fan of that hard angle there, but you know, we could always fix that. But there's the red one. So let's call this bow, red ribbon 1. Let's duplicate it, although maybe instead of duplicating it, what we do is we create an instance of it. But first, let's kind of center the pivot point here. So I'm going to select the spline, tools, axis, center axis 2. That's not quite what I wanted, although it's better. So let's go back to our axis menu and choose axis center, because that's what I really meant to do. And I'll turn on auto update, switch this to the Y axis all the way down, and then a positive Z. And it'll put it right there in the middle, which is great. Now I need to make the sweep in the same spot. So I'm going to have that spline selected, go tools, axis, center parent 2. Now that's centered there. And what I'll do is with that selected, come here and create an instance. So that way, if I need to do anything to it, we absolutely can. Rotate it 180 degrees. There we go. And what I could do here is actually group this. Right, call this ribbon group. Take this area light down here. And then switch out what the instance is using, have it use that ribbon group, because now in this ribbon group, I can build my green one, assuming it's inside that null. So we'll call this green. Or at least try to and fail at spelling, because spelling's hard. And really just kind of do this the same way, right? So apply the green material and adjust the width of this, and then the shape here just needs to be ever so larger so that it sticks out. This is a bit of a problem with how we're scaling it here. We're scaling it from this middle point, so it's kind of scaling outward. So what I'll do is go to tools, axis. I really just want to center axis 2, but I have to go to the axis center tool here because it'll just automatically apply this. Reset it. There we go. And now when I scale this out, I should get something that sticks out a little bit more evenly all the way around. And yeah, because I'm having it instance the whole group now, we can do that. And we could keep duplicating out this group so that we get more of these. We get however many you want. Now, we do have some overlapping in the middle there. The good news is that's easy to fix. You know, our entire ribbon here is pretty much being controlled by these two splines for the green and the red one. Honestly, I could probably instance the spline, so it's only one. But that's how I would come in here and let's see if I can solo these if that works. Not quite. We'll turn this off. There we go. And go into point mode and see if we can't fix this, although it'll be a bit tricky because they are different shapes. But I think, oh, is it not going to let me move 2 handles at once? That's a shame. So let's see if we can't make this happen. Let's make sure we're in our move tool. Make sure we hold shift to break this. Do something like that. Select the same point and get it close. Definitely should have done this before, but we'll make it work. Looks okay. Hopefully that gives us a little bit less intersecting. Turn all this stuff back on. And yeah, a little bit. And look, you want more of these? Absolutely can. Just keep going. Are we going to get road intersecting? Yes. Is it the end of the world? It is not. So the more of these we have, kind of a little bit, it hides some of our issues, although perhaps not. One thing we could also experiment with here is in our ribbon group, in our sweep, experimenting with the end scale. So that's not quite what we want. So why don't we try, let's see, end scale, trying to figure out which, okay. So if end scale isn't quite doing it, then we want to do the beginning scale. No? That's really odd how it's not tapering, just kind of the end there. I guess it's because the end and the beginning are pretty much the same, or I'm not sure what point is the first. We could always put a point here in the middle and then do something like that. That seems to have worked for the red one. So I would just do the same thing here to our green one. Put a point in the middle, move that down. Ooh. And now we get a little bit less noticeable intersecting. And you could work with these points to keep refining that, but I think that looks pretty good. One last thing that is worth mentioning when it comes to the material is if you wanted to kind of give it a shiny, almost foil-like look. So what we could do, and it's pretty straightforward to do this, but we need to select our material and start increasing the metalness. That will start to give us kind of a shiny, metallic-like look to this. Now, there's a few other things you could do to maybe take this a bit further. Actually plugging in the texture here to the metalness does give this a little bit of a interesting look as well that can potentially work. So that's something to consider. And if we were going to go this foil route with this in the metalness or not, it may make sense to use a bump map to just kind of give this some irregularity. And so what I could do is get a noise, max on noise, get a bump map, right? Plug that in. And I want this to be pretty subtle and the noise pattern to be pretty large. So I'm going to solo the noise before coming down here and in the input section, scaling this up even more because I want this to be really, really large. So maybe something like 500, right? Just to kind of give this a little bit of irregularity. And what do you know? We lost the texture. So let's refresh. There we go. And, it doesn't really seem like it's doing much at the moment. So we could probably increase the height scale a little bit here. And honestly, it's almost a bit easier to see it without the texture, but you can see how it's just kind of pushing and pulling things a little bit. And so now when I do that, we should see something like that with this here. It's probably a bit too much, so maybe we would turn it down to 5. But yeah, it's just trying to make our surface not look perfectly flat. And so the bump map is definitely one way to do this. There are plenty of others, such as using a displacer, maybe even a displacement map. But that will do it for this one. If there's anything else you would like to see, please leave me a comment down below. And if you found this video helpful, I'd appreciate it if you could like it and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, take care.